Thanks for watching The Red Pill. My name is Ryan Fergurson. I'm the curator of film at the Art Gallery of Hamilton, and I'm coming to you virtually today from my home in Hamilton, which is the traditional home of the Erie, the Neutral, the Huon-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas. And I really wanted to thank the Hamilton Black Film Festival for inviting me to be a part of this conversation today about this amazing film. And I'm joined by the director, Tonya Pinkins, the writer, director, producer, and the lead in the role of Cassandra. So thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, I'm Tanya Pinkins, and I am joining you from the traditional home, the unceded territory of the Lenni Lenape Natikoke Mohican people. I am a brown-skinned woman. I'm heavy-set. I have kind of short, reddish brown hair. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
I should describe my situation as well. I am a middle-aged white man with a mustache and glasses, and I am sitting in a very busy studio space with a lot of keyboards behind me. So this film you've described as your own personal get out in some ways. So I thought it would be a good place to start is to talk about where this film came from and how Get Out influenced you to start the process of making this film.
I'd say that my two biggest influences for the film would have been Get Out and Midsommar. First of all, just seeing a Black person in the lead in what is traditionally thought of as a horror film. Get Out for me was really more of a comedy. And I like comedy in my horror. And I think the biggest influence about Get Out is this realization that depending on, how you're culturally situated, mostly in America, I don't find it so much when I travel other places in the world, but America is a different country depending on your situation, culturally, racially, economically, and though we don't like to talk about class here, it's a big thing. And so I knew when I made this movie that depending on who the audience was, they were going to see a very different movie. And that's what I think happened with Get Out, is that, non-melanated people saw it one way, people with melanin saw it another way. They both had very good times, but they had different times. And I knew that would happen with Red Pill.
So as you've established this idea for the film, I like to talk, I'm really interested in what filmmakers go through to make a film and the world that you built. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the process of building the world for the film that we saw.
Well, I didn't have a lot of money and I didn't have a lot of time. And I, asked people, who do this for a living to help me and to tell me what it would cost and what it would take. And pretty much the professionals were all like, well, you don't have enough money and you don't have enough time to do the script that you've written. And so I said, well, I'm going to do whatever I can do with the resources that are available to me. And so that meant I did a lot of jobs. I wrote the script in the end of July, beginning of August 2019, and we started shooting October 31st. So that's a really short prep time. I had some specific actors in mind who I wrote the script for. I was fortunate that some of them, like Ruben Blades and Lula Mason, were willing to come on and do it. And that Ruben's schedule, we had him for 5 days. And so we had to shoot him out in the first 5 days. And so some scenes where he's in later in the movie, he wasn't there. We were shooting the other side. I never had all the actors in the car at the same time. A friend whose house I was at when the idea came for the movie lent me her house to shoot it in, other sort of things. I mean, I did every job. I did my own post-production supervising. I negotiated stock footage, that historical footage. We gave all that footage back to Germany. I had to negotiate rights from Germany to get some of that stock footage. I learned all the jobs. And so, next time I know how to hire people, because I think, I had only made shorts, and what I didn't really understand was the post process. And I now know that post is where movies get made. That's just it. Movies get made in post. period. I had 5 editors. Yeah, I fired a lot of editors. I ended up in Seoul, Korea last September and October of 2020. I went to Seoul for my editor, who is a filmmaker. She's not an editor. You can't hire for an editor. Minji Kong. I'm a super fan of South Korean horror. And so I went to Seoul and stayed, and I could sit side by side with her because I'd been editing on Zoom and it wasn't working. And the editors they were all men, and they just wouldn't take my notes, and they would never do what I was asking. And it was like 9 months after I finished shooting, I didn't even have an assembly. And because they put it in Avid instead of Premiere, I couldn't even go to my own programs that I know how to cut in and just string it together for myself. So it ended up being cut in Final Cut 7. So there was a lot of wasted money with retranscoding and transferring between things. And so, just lots of just thrown away money for things that I didn't have professionals. I couldn't afford the professionals to do it. And honestly, I don't think if I'd had the money and afforded the professionals, I still could have done it, for the amount of resources that I had.
It's, yeah, like you said, it's your first feature film. I didn't mention that off the top. It's an interesting learning process, obviously, then for you as an artist, scaling up to a full-length production. Can we talk maybe a little bit about some of the production elements of the film before we start getting into the real heavy-duty messaging and the depth of the film itself? I really like the look. It goes through this metamorphosis throughout the film, where you start with those beautiful sort of almost soft focused shots of the journey into the town, and then the film starts to get into more traditional horror film territory with how the camera's used, the close-ups, and then that through the course of that very stylized ending, where you've kind of entered a dream and exited into this horrific reality. So I know film's a very collaborative effort. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that process of establishing that whole journey that we go through visually throughout the film.
So, as Malcolm X said, Black women are the most disrespected, underprotected, neglected people in America. And I feel like I'm in the midst of reading Stacey Abrams' new novel, While Justice Sleeps. And I was like, so inspired. I was like, oh my God, she's saving the world and she's a novelist. And so, and she also talks a lot about always being underestimated. And so we always overdo. And it always feels awkward because people don't understand how you can do all that you do. And part of surviving as a Black woman in America is that I have to be aware of everything. I have to be aware of it in the most truthful way, because my life literally depends on it. So it was obvious to me how the 2016 election was going to go. It was obvious to me how the 2020 election was going to go. And after being treated with such contempt in 2016 and just being terrified that people were so like, how do you not see? How do you not know that this woman couldn't beat a Black man? There's no way she could beat a white man. It was terrifying for me. And so when 2020 came and I knew how that was going to go, I was just like, there's no point in me trying to talk about it. I'm going to make art, because Egon Vayner said the only appropriate response to abuse is creativity. So I said, I'm going to put this in a story, and everybody's going to think it's far-fetched and ha, 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 that's so crazy. And literally that is what people said when they read the script. So far-fetched, that ending. Okay. And I think we had originally wanted it to come out in March 2020. Had it would have been dismissed as some far-fetched thing. Now people are like, did you write that after the election? No, I wrote it 2 years before. So there was, this awareness that I was writing things that people did not even believe was possible. And so I was like, great, I can have fun with it. I can just be as in your face about it, because people don't even, they just think this is a fairy tale. So I just went hard for that, just in your face with it, because I was like, nobody's going to believe it anyway.
Oh, that's amazing. I should mention, I guess, before we go on, just in case you're here as a viewer and you haven't watched the film yet, we are going to talk about that ending. So you might want to go back and watch the film before you watch the rest of this conversation. It's amazing that I would have loved to have seen it in March of 2020, because yes, What an ending. How about the filming of that sequence? Because that's like a really big dramatic set piece that you filmed there. Can you talk maybe about being, again, your first time feature director, directing that scene? Because it's also it's a pretty tough scene, I think, from your character's perspective, obviously, as well. So yeah, maybe talk about organizing that scene and running that through.
Well, it was, as I said, I didn't have a lot of professionals on set. So I was doing multiple jobs, and we only had that soundstage for that one day. And what I could not do was go overtime because I was shooting union actors. So we could not go overtime. I had to shoot while they were setting up that set. I was shooting the fight scene in another place. So I had to shoot the fight and then get over there and shoot that. All of the red pill women had read the script, but there was nothing on the screen for them. So they're just responding to my direction of how I want them to behave. And they don't know how I'm putting it together at the end, but they had read the script. So they knew that monologue that Mercy gave. So they knew the words of what was happening, but they didn't know what would be on the screen.
So you've got the script, you're not able to necessarily translate the script directly off the page onto screen because you had so many, like the challenges of putting your vision on screen. Before we go into more detail about the characters, is there anything that was left on the page and didn't make it to the screen that you would have really liked to have had on the screen?
The opening scene was a more extensive scene. That was, you actually sort of met the two people and went through the process of them getting taken. And, it was just, it was a full scene. And my SFX person just showed up and dropped a bunch of materials and left. We didn't, I told him I need a silicone baby. He didn't bring me a silicone baby. So we couldn't show you the baby. We were supposed to get the man's throat slit. He just left us some things. So we couldn't do it. So there were just all these things, and we're like, okay, we're going to just shoot whatever we can shoot, and we're going to have to cut it and make it something montagey because we can't. And so if I'd say for me I think there could have been more development of that particular storyline, but we just didn't get the scene. And we didn't get the scene because our on-set SFX person just abandoned us.
Even still, in the final cut of the film, it's a pretty visceral scene, and it's definitely sets the film up quite effectively. It's definitely, when the film started, I was like, oh, this is where we're going. I'm in this world now. And then cut to the beautiful fall pastoral landscape.
And that's my style. I like the horrors that just horror, and then you got to recover. And then you can recover for a long time because what was really important to me is generally in horror, it's always really young people. So that entering dialogue is just stupid. You don't even have to be there. You're just meeting the monster bait. And it was really important for me for what they were talking about to be important. And I wanted to make you listen to it. And I wanted to make you listen to it without judging the people who were saying it. So I don't let you see them. You just have to hear what they're saying. And then you have to decide who are they, what's their politics, and that was important to me because we make so many judgments based on what people look like.
And those characters and that, the casting, the characters, those specific people together in that specific group. When you're writing the script, where are you pulling those people from? Life experience, or is this you have a targeted sort of idealized person A, person B, and then to translate that through to an actor in the scene?
Well, my world is just incredibly filled with people from all over. That's just how I roll. And so every project that I make looks like my world looks like. So it was important to me to have as many points of view as I possibly could. And I knew that for some people who don't have a world like that, they would even be like, how do these people get together? Like, that's really your problem about why your world doesn't look like that. This is just what my world looks like. And that, for me, what is exciting about being alive is that everybody sees things differently. So I think the process of getting notes from people was fascinating, because their notes really would depend on where they were culturally or age-wise situated, and things that they didn't get or didn't make sense. And I'd be like, okay, because this person over here from this culture, that is like the thing for them. And being comfortable with the fact that I was going to leave some people behind in moments that were going to bring certain people really, really in. Like, there was a number of notes from people that were like, what is this Muslim dua thing? And I was like, you know what? That's for the Muslim people. Because I don't have a Muslim actor, but they know they're represented in here. Where somebody else was like, oh, you're laughing when they say they. That's going to offend the trans people. I'm like, the trans people are included. We were thinking about them. And for me, just wanting to have references to this collective peoples that are just so many different kinds of peoples in the world.
That's great. I see, because it builds that real sense of these people that are, liberally minded. They come with their own little cracks all along the way, but it's interesting to see how that group dynamic builds over that night in the house. Can you talk about casting? I know you did the casting yourself as well, and you're working with some very well-known faces. So can you maybe just elaborate a bit on your process of casting and how you were able to make that work inside of the confines of your budget and your time and all of that?
So it's about some friends. I think actors always have the stuff we do for us and the stuff we do for them, and they got to pay us a lot of money, and we'll come and work for our friends for no money. So it was really about calling actors who I knew and who I could pick up the phone and get. If I had to go through a gatekeeper, there was just no point. There was not going to be the time, and the gatekeepers were not going to even send those people to me. So as I said, I wrote it for Ruben and Luba, and I had not worked with Ruben on Fear of the Walking Dead, but I knew him from there, and I knew Luba from the cabaret scene, and I didn't know if they'd do it or that they'd be available, but they had invited me over for dinner, and the first thing Ruben says is, you really got to make your own things. And I'm like, well, speaking of which, Ruben, I got this script right here, and I gave it to them, and Luba really loved it. And about a week before shooting, she's like, has Ruben called you yet? Like, about what? I told him he needs to tell you, he doesn't drive. I'm like, what? He doesn't drive? He's driving the whole opening of this movie. Finding women to play the red pill. I'm not going to say who that is, but finding them, that I sent it to a lot of very famous actor women friends, and it just scared the hell out of them. They were just like, mm-mm. And then the actress who ultimately got that part, I sent her the script, and she called me up and she said, thank you for inviting me to play this awful woman. She was like, her politics, everything about it. She was like, yes, I want to play this. And I think she does it so well because she's just not the person you'd ever expect. The Nick character, I really had wanted that to be someone gay or trans, and those actors that I knew wouldn't do it either. And so Nick is like an old friend of mine. Our kids grew up together, and I brought him in from California. And Adeshala is a wonderful actor who's a Babalao, and he had told me something wonderful was happening for me and in the future. And Harold Perrineau was going to play that role. And then Harold and Ruben's schedules didn't jibe. And so I had to make a choice. And so I went with Ruben, and I got Adeshala, who came in and actually is, that Afro-Caribbean, he's got that is his culture. So he understood this way of seeing people and could say those lines, whereas Harold was a little more like, I'm married to a white woman. Like, are you saying you hate white people? I'm like, no.
That character of Nick, yeah, must have been hard to cast. He definitely gets the most eye rolls, I'm guessing, from an audience.
There are people who love Nick, And because to me, he's the clown, and there are people who love him, and then there are people who hate him and like, who could ever be with him? And I'm like, but in most movies, that would be a Black, a Latino, or an Asian person. You would be like, well, that's just how they are. And so for me, it was also about flipping your idea of who's the clown, who gets away with what.
Again, the last thing I want to talk about the production before we get into the film itself is the mood, the atmosphere, how you use the score, music, and sound effects, and how that was utilized to build the world and sort of develop the mood over the course of the film.
Well, my sound designer is Paul Su, who's like, you know, the creme de la creme. And I mean, if you watched it online, you don't even know that the film, it's in surround sound. It's in 7.1. So if you could ever see it in a theater, it's in 7.1 surround sound. I've heard it, you know, you can do it with headphones and hear it. Like you can hear crickets, you can hear a dog barking a block away. I like sort of contrast. So in talking to my composer and having to describe the kind of music I want, Tassos Iliopoulos, who I met online, you know, in Greece, I'm explaining this movie to him. And he happens to be Jewish and Greek. And so he understood this sort of Wagnerian thing, and that was really the music of Hitler. And how do we make this thing at the end where we're seeing the most horrible, but for them, it's the most victorious. And like, that's my thing.
It is so great in that scene. Just wow. So let's start talking about the Red Pill itself, the movie. So the title of the film, The Red Pill, that the sort of sect that appears in the film, The Red Pill, that phrase is pretty loaded to begin with. It's a pretty politically loaded phrase, especially coming out of the 2016 election. Was that specifically, and that movement, that sort of men's positivity movement that sort of grew around the internet, is that where the basic concept of the red pill as the starting point came from? Or is it going back further to the idea of the red pill from the Matrix as being that opening to enlightenment?
No, actually, neither of those were the starting points. The starting point was really just me being constantly frustrated with what I see as the inability for what in America are Democrats or liberals to see reality. Really just that. And I follow, you know, David Duke and Richard Spencer. Like I follow everybody. My world is not like this. I'm following everybody. I want to know what's going on in the world. So I had spent some time in the manosphere. And, you know, that can be a really slimy hole to go into, and started finding all these ways where things just get flipped to mean other things in other ways. And I was up at my friend's country house, and it was the weekend that we had, in America had 2 mass shootings in 2 weekends in a row. Now, this year we've already had 7 mass shootings every week of the year. And she was just being very dismissive about it. Oh, you know, just random crazies. And out of my mouth came, it seems like random crazies because you can't imagine that there might be a leader behind them who has a vision of 1,000-year reign. And so then I just got to thinking about that, and I started riffing around that. You know, what would that be? What would be the modern version of that today? And then one day the symbol popped into my head because I was like, it's got to be visual. You can't say these things. You've got to say it. And when that symbol popped into my head and I started playing around with it and seeing what it could look like and what it could do, I was like, oh, so that's what it is. And it's the same way that, you know, Hitler took the Hindu forked cross. That's what this is. This is about people who will be whatever they need to be in order to accomplish whatever they want. And I think that's what we see with what we have as our Republicans. And now with this, we're going to get the rationals. That whatever needs to be said, whatever needs to be done, they will do it, they will say it, they will be it. They morph to accomplish whatever they want. And our liberal democratic side just kind of imagines that if you keep forging ahead with the truth in the face of a big gun, you're gonna survive. And it's just like crazy to me. So it was also important to me that the quote heroes were not so heroic.
Yeah, that's great. Very apparent. The symbol, yeah, that's so. The source of that symbol is it's the symbol from traditionally mostly known in Hinduism and Buddhism, which is also a sort of a state of consciousness symbol. So to flip it in that way and utilize it is pretty pretty amazing. I mean, also that symbol gets used like as we start talking about the layers of the film and you know the group of women who are all part of the red pill society, that also ties into that faux spirituality perhaps,
Yes.
that exists in culture. Yeah,
Yes.
that's your pathway out of
spiritual. I don't see color. Yeah. Yeah. So I was definitely playing with all of that. And
well,
how you would see it, depending on if you were one of those people, you would look and that would look really great and wonderful for you.
it settles back into some of the establishing bits in the home where you know the feng shui is mentioned, the crystals are set up. There's a little bit of establishing that, a bit of that into your primary, the good guys, the people we're rooting for. So were there other, did that just sort of come to you, or were you re-looking at symbols trying to find, like, did you have a target for a symbol to be used in that way and you were auditioning them? Or
I was more like, I saw what Hitler has done. I need an equivalent. And then one day, and I did go look at what there was. And then one day that one sort of popped into my head in the way that I use it. I was like, what? And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's it. There's just no other way. Like that coincidence is too strange. And then there was this sense of like, I'm actually protecting it by being a Black person who's saying it, that though they wouldn't care and they'd say I didn't really say it. If they really wanted it, they'd say, no, she stole it from, you know. But the original person putting it out there is a Black person, so it should have a little like, we don't want to touch that to it.
yeah. Except for 20 layers down some weird internet.
Yeah, they'll forget. They'll see like, oh, this is our movie.
Yeah, we did it. Yeah. There was a part of me when I was thinking about the film after and reading some things, it's how you could possibly get those people to watch the film. You know, they get sucked in by the title or something.
No, and I mean, I would welcome the opportunity to actually sit with a group of really conservative people and just see what their take of it was. Because I don't feel like I felt like I wasn't, I mean, if I was judging anybody, I was judging the heroes. The other people, I was like, they're real clear. They're real clear. Mission accomplished it.
Yeah, I felt the same way, and that the heroes are the ones like, yeah, the bad guys are the bad guys. They're bad. They're not doing anything good, and we know where they're coming from. That's a horrible place. But the little cracks in the main group of protagonists is interesting to see how deep our history runs. And I say ours because Canada often acts like we're not part of that history. And it's, in some ways, I think the way you characterize or talking about Democrats is that's sort of always been the Canadian stance. You know, that's not us. It's just really well hidden for us. So, so when you're talking that scene in the film where everyone's like, the red pill is brought out as a real, you know, an object, and there's a bit of discussion about it. They do talk about a few different ideas of what the red pill is. I mean, in the credits and in the execution of the film, the red pill is almost explicitly stated as that collection of people. But is there a red pill inside of the group as well, as you see it in the film?
Oh, so you didn't see that there was a red pill inside of the group? Really? Okay.
I didn't see. Yes, like I read an interview, and you did this to the person who interviewed you. So
Yeah.
what I saw as the red pill in the group was not an individual. I thought it was more this, what I just sort of touched on previously, was perhaps the systemic racism that informs even progressive people in this current situation. It's still informing them in some way.
Well, there is a red pill in the group. I won't give that away because some people get it, and some people, and for me, it's very much like the Allison Williams things where she said after Get Out that people just refused to believe she was bad. And our red pill is really someone you never want to believe is bad. Yes, there's a red pill in the group, but I think I like to use red pill to mean just someone who infiltrates a group to change the nature of that group, so that I've been envisioning a red pill series, and some of the characters who are quote red pills in this movie would be red pilling the red pills in the future. So the red pill is just anybody who takes on whatever you have to do in a group, but your function is to go in and turn that group into something else.
That's a really good explanation of that, and I like that concept of taking it in that any one of those people or any one of us in general can actually be that person, depending on what group
Right.
we're in. That's very interesting, and I do appreciate not giving it away. I tend to talk when I do these kinds of conversations. I like to tend to talk more about the intention of making the film and what it took to make it and how you built that, because I know for me personally, subjectivity is good in art. Some artists really want their message to be very clear, and there are some very clear messages in this film.
And I don't, my son and I talked about that. Like, do you want people to get this? I'm like, no, I've been more fascinated by what people do get. Like, I think for me as an artist, I feel that it's the most vulnerable work I've ever gotten to do, because every aspect of it, I had the final say. There was, because I funded it, nobody could tell me, people could tell me I don't like it, and I'd be like, okay. But I have the final line. I don't have to please anybody but me. And so I feel like if you see it, you get a glimpse through, through my eyes. This is how I see some things. Not all the time, but it's what I see. And I feel like I don't often get to see through Black female lens, which is why I just started a whole series with TCG and HowlRound called Through a Black Woman's Lens, and have some different Black artists and creators and businesswomen talking about how they see things, because Black women spend so much time supporting other people, and sometimes we don't know what it is they're doing that we can lend our support to. So yeah, that was important to me to just hear what people thought, and people told me some amazing things about the film that I didn't even know was in the film, and I recognize that it's a smart film. I think you can enjoy it for what it is, but if you're not into the politics of it, you'll be like, okay, the opening right in, you'll be eating your popcorn and texting, which is what I'm doing in the beginning of most horror films. Like, they're not saying anything I got to pay attention to. But for people who are actually politically engaged, it's like, oh, they're talking about the real things that we wish politicians would be talking about.
And metaphorically, I'd like to pull out a few things from the film. The cardinal comes up quite frequently. I know the color red is laid all over the film, and that's generally associated with passion. Cassandra seems to be the only person in the group who notices any of this. I mean, we are seeing the world largely through Cassandra's viewpoint, so red is a trigger in a lot of ways. And at one point, Cassandra even says, "You're not noticing all the red flags."
Right.
So the use of the color red is, like I said, generally kind of associated with passion, and passion can take on several forms.
Right, and red is in spirituality, red is a protective color. So
Yes.
when you want to be safe, you wear red, and you put red on your bed. So I was also just fascinated by, depending on where you are in the world, things have different meanings. So red is a very positive and powerful meaning, yet in America, it is our ultra conservative meaning. But that doesn't get rid of the fact that it's still a very powerful and protective color. So definitely was interested in all of that. The whole dream sequence, I think one or two people have gotten the dream sequence and what the whole metaphor of that is. And that is really the story of how our political parties got their names, which originates in an Aesop's fable of the donkey and the lion skin. And, at the end of that dream, Cassandra's saying, shut up, you Democrats, shut up, stop talking.
Nick and his damn donkey noise. It's interesting. Yeah, it's very jarring. And then I when I did sort of realize that, oh yeah, this is creating another layer of the political messaging here. Yeah,
right.
that dream is.
Yeah. The lion, that was our last president's moniker. He didn't take the elephant. He took the lion as his moniker. So playing with all of that without saying any of that, but playing with it.
And that color red I saw, like, this is just a side anecdote. I saw a red baseball cap that I really liked, and I'm like, I can't put a red baseball cap. Like, ever do that? The best cap I've ever seen. But
ruined it for you.
If you see it from behind, you know what it is. So that's interesting, because I did a little bit, because I didn't know anything about what a cardinal might represent. So I actually spent a little bit of time today looking up different interpretations of the cardinal as a symbol, and it does kind of hold a number of different symbols as well, and I couldn't quite pinpoint which one of those. So it's interesting that you said that about the color red, that you're kind of finding some universality and that there's different interpretations, because so will you open up the conversation about the cardinal in further detail, because I'm curious.
So because I am playing with red, I'm playing with, looking, what is a bird of Virginia? It happens to be the Virginia state bird. And playing with the messenger, like, how do they always know these things, that they are a cult and they are working with something called chaos battle magic. So they are connected with nature in ways that, most people are not. The whole, people want to know about the urine and they think, oh, you made up this crazy urine stuff. I'm like, no, honey. The urine is like, that's probably the most ordinary thing in the whole story, the use of bodily fluids in chaos magic. So definitely playing with them as, really rooted in nature and understanding how to use the power and forces of nature. Because I am, messing around in my own spirituality with the fact that we're in the age of Horus, and this idea of polarity is just not real. There's just this spectrum and it's all one. So there is this side that we think of as the bad side or the conservative side. They are as rooted and connected to nature in this whole history, and really wanting to keep us in that sort of balance that we got to have both.
Well, and if in progressive circles too, there's a lot of talk about, getting back to nature and those sorts of early roots and those definitely are strong in those who would do the opposite. So, because I thought it was interesting, because in indigenous communities in that sort of area where your film takes place, it's mostly associated with good luck. And
well, it is good luck for them.
Yeah. And in Latin America, it references a changing point. And again, when you have a turning point for some, so when you have that group of characters associated, that represents maybe different visions of the same thing. It's very interesting in the center of the film.
And the first time it happens is at the sign, which they just take down as if someone can't put it back up. Like, it's just so ineffectual. For me, that's the first one of like, oh, really? Like, that was your big victory? Okay. And the little birdie's like, okay, here they come.
Don't go inside. Don't eat the bread. So you started to talk a bit about the magic that is at work there. Can you talk about developing that cult and what went into building that sense of magic? And like you said, these things are very real.
Yeah.
These are very real practices. So how did you, was this research? Was this something that you sort of anecdotally known that you built in? How did you create that sort of?
I am,
sect.
yeah, I'm a crazy researcher. I've always been fascinated by the scatological rites of nations. And so, really, as I was trying to put the story together, I was like, what's the difference in the heroes and the bad guys? And I was like, well, the heroes talk a lot. They talk too much. And the bad guys don't talk at all. They're all action. They're all action. So what are the actions? How many actions? What can I show them doing? And how they're doing is far more effective than all of this philosophizing and theorizing. So that was an important piece for me. As I said, I'm just very into scatology. So I've been reading the scatological rites of nations for years and the Book of P. And that urine ritual is a real ritual. The idea that, it's presidential seal is on that bottle and, the first person can take the pure and then everybody else has to take it the other way. And so for them, it's this taking of some sacred thing, but then you can use it energetically on someone else when you give it to them or marking your territory with it. Those are just things that are interesting to me. And I'm always, I'm just curious, and I can't think of much of anything that I wouldn't go and try or check out. So I've just been in some really interesting circles. I just,
You mentioned in there our protagonists are good guys doing too much talking, and our antagonists are bad guys being all action. That really seems to summarize a lot of real basic kind of understanding of Trumpism in a way, is that it's single-minded progress in this direction, and liberalism kind of is a big collective discussion that gets caught up inside of its own net sometimes, and gets consumed. So as you're like, it's clear what you're like, to me, it's clear that that's what you're going for.
That's what I'm doing. But I also recognize that in doing that, I was violating every rule of commercial storytelling. They talk too much. Well, that's the point. I want you to know that you talk too much. That is the point.
And where is the action point in all the talk? Because in our film, our protagonists never really get there.
Have we gotten there?
No, we sure have not.
Have we gotten there? I mean, when it was planned to come out in March, I was like hoping, will this be the wake up call? Can it be a wake up call for people? And now, it's passé. I mean, the Karen meme didn't even exist when I made this film. So I knew I was talking about things that people hadn't even thought about at that time. And so now people have an access point because history is caught up with my storytelling. But I was always saying that.
Yeah, I said, I think I commented at the beginning when you said that I hadn't realized how far back production went on this, and that, in some ways, pandemic aside, 2020 is pretty much in your film. So,
and I filmed in 2019.
Yeah. And it's a difficult thing, I think, probably for a lot of audiences to take, in that, this has been happening. This is here. It was there. And it in some ways it reflects back, I think, in your film, and I'm going to ask you to maybe expand on this, is that Cassandra seems very aware of what's happening the whole time. And I might go as far as to say the group sort of gaslights her in a way.
Yes, absolutely.
But in that the Black woman is at the center of this and seeing everything that's happening. Can you talk about, because that's probably at the core of this film and where you started.
That's how I feel like my life is. I'm always like, I can tell you what's going to happen. I think the Aboriginal people call it pattern mind. When the lambs are sheeping, this is what crop is happening. Like, they're patterns and they're inevitable. And so I feel like I see them, and there are very few Americans who just don't treat me like I'm stupid. which is probably why the film is doing so well outside of America, and American people are like, no, we don't want to see that film. So it's a frustrating thing living in America and seeing the world in this way that America's idea of itself, it can't reconcile itself with the story that is my truth of how I see my country. It's just a fact, and there's nothing in there. Those are just factual things. They just made a law in Florida that you got a defense now if you run over a protester. 3 people gathered together is a protest. You can be charged with a felony. Rome is on the way to falling. If we lose House and Senate in 2022, it's over forever.
So in that, gosh, I don't know what to say out of that, because the lines are so clear, and it's as plain as day in some ways.
Yeah, it is, and but nobody's talking about it, and so it's like walking around and being saying the emperor has no clothes. That's how I feel most of my life. I'm just walking around, the emperor has no clothes, and nobody's listening to me.
And the distraction of social media is just so heavily, in some ways, social media is the red pill for everyone. And that the truth is whatever you want it to be, because it's programmed to tell you what your truth is.
Yeah.
Your truth in reality is a lot different than your truth in your hand. And
that is
where
so
most
real.
people live.
Yeah, my daughter and I were looking at Twitter yesterday, and she was like, I'm looking at this, and I'm like, what is your search word? And I would do that search word. I would not get the same thing she got.
Oh, that's an amazing experiment. I've never thought to do that. Yeah, that's, wow. So you mentioned in that audience response, obviously you've released the film in a pandemic, so I'm guessing you haven't had a chance to see it in a theater with an audience.
No, only people, in festivals writing me and, just having conversations with them. I hope one day I'll get to see it in a theater, but yeah.
Having had the experience of showing Get Out to a festival audience and having that conversation after, again, I don't want to lump your 2 films together. You did mention, it's that it was an influence. I've loved the conversations to be had after this film. And it's one of the things that I like a lot of the things about an online film festival, because we can have this conversation, which we could never have at a film festival because the next movie's coming in 10 minutes. So we have 10 minutes to have a little Q&A. But yeah, I would definitely love to have the experience of seeing this with an audience. Where have you been showing it? What types of festivals are screening the film?
So we were at the Pan-African Film Festival. The very first film festival we were at was Cine Excess in Birmingham, England, which is a festival that's a lot of academics in England put this festival together. So they were totally into all the messaging and metaphor and stuff like that. It's being translated into Russia for a horror festival in Moscow. It's being translated into Spain for a terror festival in Tárrega. I just won outstanding direction for at the Oscar Michaud Festival, which was an in-person festival in LA last week. I think coming up, we are in Croatia. Barcelona. We're gonna be, where else? Gosh, so many are coming up right now. Charlotte, North Carolina. We're gonna be in Roxbury, Massachusetts. I think those are the ones that are coming up. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I mean, we've been in 16 festivals. We won a lot of international awards. Oh, Venezuela, we won a lot of awards. We've won a lot of awards in Spain. We've won a lot of awards. We won awards in Sweden, Amsterdam. I forget. Yeah, we internationally, it's been well received. And then there are the haters. There are the haters. And you got to see that hate comes. And it's like, it's to be expected. I always say that if you're really telling the truth, it should invite the polls. You should get love and hate when you're talking truth. That's what truth does.
I specifically went and sourced out some negative reviews to see what the negative commentary is. And yeah, it is always interesting to see, and it's not, it's too political. not horror enough. And I do find it interesting to make a horror film like this. Why did you decide that horror was the right genre to put? Well, I think I know the answer, but I want to put this story into.
Well, I love horror. It's just my favorite genre. I'm like one of those people who watch 3 or 5 horror movies in a day easily. I watch them before bed. It's very relaxing for me. And I knew that I was going to be talking about things that people didn't want to talk about. So horror is this place where people can pretend it's just fantasy and it's not real. I think even like some of the negative reviews have been this source for me of a further conversation because they actually reflect the experience of being a Black woman. Like I think there was one reviewer who said something about, when she gets a little more, mature, or, she'll learn how to handle her point of view and stuff like that. And I'm looking at him like, I'm like old enough to be your grandmother. And you're telling me, it's like, yes, but in the context, you're just a Black woman, you're nothing. So I can talk about you in this way. I don't even have to have looked you up to see that you have a history and a whole, and it's like, yep, it just more, reinforces why I needed to tell this story, to talk about the experience of being a Black woman, being erased, being invisible, people telling all of their business and knowing everybody's business because they actually just aren't worried that if I ever told anyone I'd be believed. So I know so many things.
While we're getting closer, we're almost at our hour. I wanted to talk about some of the things that people don't want to talk about in the film. In that specifically how the sect, the cult, is essentially a group of white women. They've kind of been, I've seen in some of the writing about the film, they're being called the Karens. A group who did have a lot to do with Donald Trump getting elected. White women did vote for Donald Trump.
Well, yeah, 3% more than the past. But I think that one of the challenges for people of color is that white women have taken over the diversity space. So if it's diversity, they can take all the jobs, and diversity has been covered. And so they get this free pass as if they didn't have anything to do with colonialism and slavery. They were running the churches that took the schools that took the Native Americans out of their homes to, re-educate them. And so I felt that it was really important that's one of those things that we don't talk about. And it's like, we got to talk about it because they get to have all this privilege, they get access to power, and they get to claim oppression at the same time. Not to say that they aren't oppressed, but they still have access that other people don't have, and they are able to oppress from where they are. And so I really wanted to talk about that because I in that sense of starting local, I'm really interested in how I can affect other women because I don't know what it is to be a man. It's hard for me to tell a man how to do differently, but I'm fascinated by how women get in other women's way. We are the majority on the planet, and yet we're not running things. Like, why is that? So here's one way I see why we're not, because white women, you are not helping your sisters, okay?
And so the conversation, there's a couple interesting points amongst the protagonists when some of those fractures start to appear. There's the conversation where over dinner where I can't remember which character it is. It's one of the male characters who basically says, the woman slavers were as wicked as the male slavers. I was interested by the decision to have. I'm almost certain it was one of the male characters who said that.
It was Nick.
It was Nick. Okay, yeah. Nick. So why that when you're writing that line for Nick, why specifically was Nick the character that was saying that?
Because I was thinking of Nick's position as a white male and feeling like he's always right in this moment in time. He says later, I'm the most hated being on the planet right now, and wanting to not be in the alone and taking blame.
I see. Yeah, I see. That makes a lot of sense there. Yeah. And then there's one of the things that I loved was when after Rocky is killed, and Amelia says, "We're animals inside." I find that to be very interesting because it really starts to, take away all the layers between people. But then, of course, in the end, who's drinking the pee? And it speaks to a lot of performative activism that is never has to be challenged, and the privilege that I, as a white person watching the film, that we have in that is almost never challenged. So I really found it fascinating how you took that and really challenged those characters, and they failed the challenge. And God, that ending is amazing.
Thank you. I wrote a whole essay on performative activism on Medium, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's like a big one. It's a big essay.
I'm going to find that and read that, because I think it's a really interesting topic. It's one that I'm in a...
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've always just felt in my lived experience is that I'm much safer with a racist, a person who's just an avowed racist, because they're really clear and they're in integrity with self. So they're going to act consistently. There's a consistency, and there's a way that Northerners are performing tolerance all the time, and conscious of, is this politically correct? Can I say this? Can I do this? Can I do this? And the body just doesn't lie. The animal body doesn't lie. And so you can feel that, and you know that if shit gets real, they are not choosing. Well, there's studies that have shown it. There's the wonderful podcast, Nice White Parents, that shows how nice white parents are the reason that New York schools are still segregated. They did another study in Los Angeles where they were interviewing all these liberal parents in the Pacific Northeast, and saw that their values espoused did not match their values in action. And so that has always interested me, because it's been my experience. But, you can't tell that to people who are telling you they're so for you, and you're like, yeah. Shit gets real, I'm on my own.
I really hope I hope white audiences see it and see the mirror on the screen, because it's not easy. And but it's truth, and truth shouldn't be. And I think 2020 with the pandemic, it has shown a lot of that in society.
Yeah. And we're in trouble here. We are in the midst of a civil war. I spent 3 months in Mississippi, and my country is so uneducated, and it's uneducated by design. And people who live in the North really have no idea about how people in certain parts of the country are living, and that it does not match at all. Like, there are people who are 2 steps out of slavery in America. So yeah.
And the testing grounds for that Civil War might not be how we think of the Civil War hundreds of years ago. It could be in your hand or on your screen. And those limits are being tested.
Yeah, I think we're in a civil war right now in America. It is happening.
Yeah, as a Canadian, we observe America. We, again, like I say, we are always like, well, that's not us. It is us as well. But that election, and I think it's very interesting that you chose the election as the point in this film, because it seemed from an outside perspective that something was inevitable there, that a civil war, as we've kind of described it, is inevitable. And it's not the war that we thought it was going to be. Those, that people marching on the Capitol. The
insurrection that they're rewriting the history of. Yeah. The whole, that project where they want America to be an Anglo-Saxon country. They're just being real honest. I don't know if you saw that the guy in Texas last week who was, putting forth the purity in the vote thing, and was like completely oblivious to the fact that was Jim Crow.
It's unbelievable. But as we're dealing with the pandemic here, and I don't want to localize this and get into it, we could talk for hours. I feel like you and I could just have this conversation forever. Election laws are kind of being little changes happening. Well, your leaders, they do grandiose things. Everyone's locked down. We're still locked down here. We're locked down.
We're not.
Everyone's waiting. Yeah, everyone's waiting to get their vaccines. Everyone's distracted, waiting for this thing to happen. And politicians do what politicians do, and it's,
And the parties are the same party. I always wonder things like when whatever her name is, the red pill woman on the Supreme Court, when she was sitting there talking about, she's a literalist, a constitutional literalist. And I'm like, so why does no one say to her, well, literally under the Constitution, you were a piece of property. So you need to go back home to the kitchen. Why do they, that's just such the obvious thing. Why does no one say that to her?
Yeah, it's, yeah, it's mind boggling. Well, and I'm really grateful to have seen your film, and to be able to have these conversations about it. And like I said, to have moments where the mirrors, there's some of you in here, and you need to not, it's, you need to reflect on that and figure out why that is.
Yeah.
And if it's just some of you, meaning how society operates, or whether, there's pieces and characters. So thank you for it. It's a really exceptional film, and I'm happy to have had the opportunity to talk to you today about it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that so much.
Did I miss anything?
Here in Canada. No,
Yeah.
I think we got everything. We got all the little things that I wanted. Yeah, we talked about everything. Yeah.
Amazing. Next time we'll do this in person. You come up here, or we'll come to you if we have to.
May it be so. I would love to.
Okay. Thanks very much, Tanya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.